Imagine walking into Hollywood's premier recording studio in 1969. You're expecting to find the ultimate hippie utopia, right? Peace, love, maybe some acoustic guitars strumming in a circle.
Yeah, totally. The whole Laurel Canyon myth.
Exactly. But instead, you walk into Wally Heider's Studio 3, and you are just immediately hit by a wall of absolute resentment. You are dropping straight into a toxic, completely fractured reality where four massive clashing egos are just staring daggers at each other. They're barely on speaking terms.
It's actually staggering when you dig into the primary sources from those sessions. The tension in that room was a literal pressure cooker.
Right.
And it was entirely at odds with the public image they were selling. I mean, they were basically being marketed to the world as the acoustic conscience of an entire generation.
And what's wild to me is if you listen to a song like Our House, you hear this pristine nursery rhyme, domestic bliss. I mean, it sounds like the perfect counterculture utopia. But the brutal reality of their personal lives at that exact moment was just a total nightmare. Graham Nash and Joni Mitchell had just split. Stephen Stills and Judy Collins had broken up. And David Crosby was completely shattered, actively mourning the sudden, tragic death of his girlfriend, Christine Hinton.
Yeah, their personal worlds were just completely collapsing. They were grappling with this profound grief and heartbreak and these massive ego clashes. Yet they were tasked with recording this harmonious, communal masterpiece for millions of expectant fans.
Which honestly forces us to just completely geek out over the sheer technical madness of this album, because this supposed communal vocal triumph, it wasn't sung around a campfire holding hands.
Not at all.
It was a modular jigsaw puzzle built in complete isolation over 800 grueling hours.
Right. It was this meticulously engineered high-fidelity illusion. They were building a monument track by track, vocal by vocal, completely isolated from each other.
An illusion that required the ultimate act of studio betrayal to actually pull off. I'm talking about Stephen Stills and engineer Bill Halverson literally taking razor blades to splice the title track Déjà Vu together behind David Crosby's back. Welcome to Deep Cuts and Deep Thinking.
Today we're dissecting an album that really defined the transition from the optimistic 60s to the cynical 70s.
Yeah, our mission for you on this deep dive is to sort through this massive stack of historical and musicological sources. We really want to figure out how four massive clashing egos managed to engineer a flawless illusion of harmony, because it really became the definitive soundtrack of 1970s disillusionment.
To understand how this album works, we have to look at the tension between the utopian dreams they were selling and the grim reality they were living. And there's just no better starting point than Our House.
Right, Our House. Because we just mentioned how toxic the studio was, but this song is the ultimate Laurel Canyon oasis.
It really is. And if you look at Nash's recounting of the story, the origins of this track are incredibly mundane. I mean, it happened on a cold, gray Los Angeles morning. Nash and Mitchell had eaten breakfast at this deli on Ventura Boulevard.
Okay.
And on the way back, they stopped at an antique store, and Mitchell bought a cheap Tudor-style vase.
A vase. That's it.
Literally just a vase. They drove up to her cottage, and Nash simply said, "I'll light the fire, and you put some flowers in the vase." While she was arranging them, he just sat at her piano and wrote the entire song in about an hour.
Okay, let's unpack this for a second, because if the studio environment was so toxic and their personal lives were falling apart, how did they protect this track from sounding completely infected by all that misery? It's like trying to build a cozy campfire while the entire forest is burning down around you.
Yeah, it's a great question. They protected it through very careful musical architecture. If you listen closely, it's built on a Baroque pop foundation.
Meaning what, exactly?
So think of Baroque pop like injecting classical music elements into a standard pop song. You have Nash playing both the piano and a harpsichord, which gives it this really Victorian storybook texture.
Oh, right. The harpsichord is so distinct on that track.
Exactly. And underneath that, there's this grounding, descending bass line that just anchors the whole thing, making it feel structurally safe. It feels like a literal home made out of sound.
But there's a massive missing piece to this puzzle, isn't there? Because protecting that bubble required keeping someone out of it.
It absolutely did. The most deliberate choice on Our House is the complete absence of Neil Young.
Wow.
Yeah, he doesn't appear on this track at all. Young's style was just so raw. He played this heavily distorted lead guitar and had these idiosyncratic, haunting vocals. If he had stepped into that pristine arrangement, he would have shattered it.
Right.
The song was a deliberate shield. It was a snapshot in amber of a hippie domesticity that was already dead by the time the public heard it.
Man. So they have this fragile, perfect bubble. And since Our House required total isolation from Neil Young to work, it perfectly highlights how this entire album was built on a new philosophy of musical quarantine, right?
Yeah, they had to transition into a completely different way of recording just to survive each other. They moved to Wally Heider's Studio 3, which was utilizing the brand new Ampex MM1000 tape machines.
And these were the massive 2-inch 16-track machines, right?
Exactly. This was a huge leap forward from the 4- and 8-track technology they had used before. It finally gave them the real estate to record parts individually rather than playing together in a room.
Here's where it gets really interesting to me. They're recording a communal folk album, but they can't even stand to be in the same room. How do you manufacture a wall of vocals that sounds like brothers singing around a campfire when it's actually 9 different vocal takes stitched together?
Well, you do it with obsessive overdubs, and you use a very specific piece of audio hardware. Engineer Bill Halverson's secret weapon was the Universal Audio 1176 peak limiter.
Okay, the 1176.
Right. This was a completely new type of compressor that was FT-based, with ultra-fast attack times, ranging from like 20 to 800 microseconds.
Okay, wait. Translate that for non-engineers listening.
Yeah.
Because I'm trying to visualize how a machine creates harmony.
Okay, fair enough. Imagine a bouncer at a nightclub who is so incredibly fast, he catches a screaming voice the exact millisecond it gets too loud.
Huh. Okay, I like that.
Right. He pulls the volume down gently and instantly so it doesn't drown out the others. Older compressors were slow. They would awkwardly yank the volume knob up and down in this very noticeable way, which engineers call pumping.
Oh, like when the whole track seems to suck in and breathe heavily?
Exactly.
Yeah.
But the 1176 could grab the initial transient, the sharp, explosive start of a word instantly, without pumping or sounding unnatural.
So Halvorson could tame each isolated vocal take so perfectly that he could stack them without the whole thing turning into sonic mud.
That's it. Because they were recording these vocals separately, Halvorson used that compressor to ensure each voice occupied its own exact frequency space without masking the others. This glued the distinct voices together.
It's like they are audio sculpting rather than recording a live performance because, Nash is panned high and to the right to catch the crystalline top of the harmony.
Yeah.
Crosby is laying down this warm, resonant foundation in the center left, and Stills is holding the direct center.
And Neil Young was frequently tucked into the mix to provide this sort of reedy texture that cut right through the smoother blend of the other three. What's fascinating here is how Halvorson created the illusion of physical space.
How did he do that?
He used varying amounts of EMT 140 plate reverb.
Plate reverb, okay.
Yeah, plate reverb is basically a massive piece of metal suspended in a wooden box. You vibrate the metal to create a fake echo. By adjusting how much of that fake echo went onto each isolated voice, he created a three-dimensional front-to-back depth.
So to you, the listener sitting in your living room, it sounded like they were standing in a semicircle right around you, when in reality they recorded those parts weeks apart. It's just brilliant engineering covering for a broken family.
Exactly. And Stephen Stills was really the musical director organizing all of this. He was the architect taking these isolated modular recordings and arranging them into a cohesive psychological journey.
Yeah, I noticed in the research that Stills actually mapped the album out tonally. It's not just a random collection of songs thrown onto a vinyl record.
No, not at all. The album has a loose tonal architecture that essentially charts the emotional state of the counterculture. We could look at it as an EGD constellation of guitar-friendly key centers.
Okay, break that constellation down for us. What do those specific keys represent?
Well, the E-centered tracks, like the opener Carry On, are your communal, outward-facing rock anthems. They're bright, they're aggressive. Then you move to the G-centered tracks, like Our House, which are all about domesticity, home, and memory. G major has a very grounded, folk-friendly resonance to it.
And the D-centered ones.
Those are the blues tracks, like Almost Cut My Hair, which plunge into inner turmoil, confession, and the darker side of the era.
Let's talk about one of those G-centered tracks for a minute, Teach Your Children, because this is one of the most famous, seemingly uplifting songs on the record, but the visual inspiration for it is actually incredibly dark.
Yeah, it really is.
Graham Nash wrote it after seeing a photograph by Diane Arbus from 1962 titled Child with Toy Hand Grenade in Central Park.
It's a profoundly disturbing image. If you've seen it, it shows this young, frail boy standing in the park, but his face is contorted in this really aggressive, manic expression.
Yeah, he looks almost possessed.
Right, and his body is entirely tense as he clutches this toy weapon. For Nash, looking at that photo, it captured the code of violence being unconsciously passed down from the World War II generation to their children.
So this song isn't just a hippie nursery rhyme at all. It's actually a desperate plea for mutual disarmament across the generation gap.
Yes, and the song is structured as a symmetrical dialogue to reflect that exact idea. The first stanza urges the parents to provide a moral code to teach their children well.
But then it flips, right?
Exactly. The second stanza pivots entirely. It asks the youth to empathize with the fears of the older generation.
Which brings us to the musical arrangement of the track, because there's a massive technical anomaly here that I love. We have to talk about the Garcia trade.
Oh, this is such a great piece of music history. Jerry Garcia of the Grateful Dead played the iconic weeping pedal steel guitar on this track, but he wasn't hired as a session musician.
No, it was a literal barter system. Crosby, Stills, and Nash agreed to help the Grateful Dead figure out their vocal harmonies for the Working Man's Dead album. And in exchange for that vocal coaching, Garcia brought his Emmons pedal steel guitar into Wally Heider's.
And he was playing it in standard E9 tuning, which gives the pedal steel its classic crying country sound.
Right, that weeping sound.
Yeah. But the incredible part is that Garcia was basically still teaching himself the instrument at the time, yet he laid down that iconic part in just 2 takes.
Which is mind-blowing. Honestly, if that pedal steel hadn't been there, the song might have sounded too preachy. But Garcia's playing is so incredibly melancholic.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, that pedal steel counter melody softens the entire message. It introduces the fear variable to the album.
Yep.
By sonically asking the youth to empathize with the fears of the World War II generation. That one track effectively anchors the moral center of the entire album.
Hold on, though. I have to ask if Nash is providing the moral center, and they've gone through all this trouble to build a safe, meticulously engineered environment. Why invite Neil Young into the band at all?
That is the million-dollar question.
Right, because if you know his raw disruption is going to test the absolute limits of this fragile system, what was keeping them all in that room?
They were trapped by their own success, honestly, and by the demands of their label. They needed to tour, and Stephen Stills needed someone who could actually spar with him on guitar in a live setting.
Okay.
Neil Young was the destabilizing element they didn't want, but absolutely needed. He was essentially a guest star who outright refused to play the part.
Man, I love geeking out over the dual guitar warfare on this record. It wasn't just a clash of personalities, it was a literal clash of instruments.
The contrast is just so stark. You have Stills acting as the polished perfectionist, playing a 1958 Gretsch white Falcon, a guitar known for its clean, shimmering highs and melodic precision.
And then you have Neil Young kicking the door down with his aggressively modified 1953 Gibson Les Paul, famously known as Old Black.
Exactly. Young's philosophy was always about simplifying to make things bigger and more visceral.
There's that famous story from the recording of Country Girl where the traditional drum kit just wasn't giving him the raw thump he wanted, so he literally stomped on the studio floorboards in his boots to get that grounded acoustic percussion.
He demanded raw, unpolished emotion, which is the exact opposite of the architectural perfection Stills was trying to achieve. And nowhere is that tension more obvious than on the title track, Déjà Vu.
David Crosby was driving this track, and as we mentioned earlier, he was deeply grieving the loss of his girlfriend. How did he translate that specific grief into the actual music?
He did it through his guitar tuning. Crosby used this jazz-influenced open tuning, EBDGAD.
Okay, let's translate that for a second. Why does changing the tuning of the strings matter so much?
Well, in standard tuning, your fingers have to work hard to hold down a cohesive chord, and the chords naturally want to resolve. They want to finish their sentence, musically speaking.
Right.
But in this open tuning, Crosby could just strum the open strings, and it automatically creates this lingering, unresolved hum. It mathematically removes the musical period at the end of a sentence.
Wow.
Yeah, it leaves every musical phrase hanging in the air like an unanswered question. It creates a drone-like atmospheric texture.
And the rhythm is completely unhinged. It features metric shifts from 44 to 98.
Which is incredibly hard to pull off smoothly.
Yeah, for anyone listening, normally a song has a steady 4-beat pulse. You tap your foot, you know exactly where it lands. A metric shift to 98 throws in an extra uneven pulse. To the listener, it feels like stepping off a curb that you didn't know was there.
And that rubato feel where the tempo speeds up and slows down based on emotion rather than a strict metronome, it perfectly mirrored the lyrical theme of a cyclical, uncanny experience.
So what does this all mean? We know Crosby is trying to capture this deeply personal, metaphysical, reincarnated feeling while mourning his girlfriend, but he couldn't nail it. And this brings us back to the Razor Blades.
Right. Because it was so fluid, it was a nightmare to record. They did roughly 100 takes.
100 takes?
Yes. And Stephen Stills simply couldn't accept the chaotic, imperfect nature of the performances. So he colluded with engineer Bill Halverson.
The ultimate betrayal.
Exactly. Behind David Crosby's back, they took the 2-inch master tape, found the exact fractions of a second they needed, and physically cut the magnetic tape with razor blades. They spliced the best parts of 2 entirely different takes together to create one flawless Frankenstein final track.
That is just brutal to me. To take someone's deeply personal song about grief, decide the performance isn't good enough, and secretly chop it to pieces so it sounds mathematically perfect, it proved that in this band, technical perfection was prioritized over trust.
It was a massive betrayal of the communal ethos they were supposed to represent. But strictly from a production standpoint, that ruthless pursuit of perfection is what saved the album.
And you could argue that pursuit of perfection didn't just save the album, it successfully commodified the entire counterculture. They took an authentic, gritty movement and transformed it into a high-end consumer product. Which brings us to the ultimate irony of the era, the song Woodstock.
The definitive anthem of the festival, written by someone who wasn't even there.
Exactly. Joni Mitchell wrote it from a hotel room in New York. Why? Because her management didn't want her to miss a scheduled appearance on the Dick Cavett Show. She literally watched the defining cultural event of her generation on television.
But missing it is what gave her the distance to mythologize it. Her original version of the song is this dark, purpley, introspective hymn. She played it on a tremoloed Wurlitzer electric piano.
And that tremolo effect gives the notes this watery, trembling feel.
Right, her version is a prayerful meditation. But when CSNY got their hands on it, they flipped it into a militant, high-energy rock anthem.
Yeah, you've got Stills on the lead vocal, shouting with absolute confidence, and Young driving the track with this aggressive lead guitar. They turned a quiet interior monologue into a massive performative manifesto.
This raises an important question. Did this record preserve the spirit of 1969, or did it just sanitize and sell it? By adding those stop-time instrumental patterns and roaring guitars, they essentially packaged the revolution for radio consumption.
And nothing proves that paradox more than the packaging of the album itself. The vinyl sleeve is famous for being the $100,000 cover.
Oh, the cover is just peak irony.
Stills commissioned this faux leather textured gatefold. And the photo on the front wasn't just a standard band photo. They used an 1850s Fox Talbot photographic technique to make themselves look like Civil War era outlaws.
It looked like a genuine antique artifact, but it was an incredibly expensive, calculated design. Spending almost $100,000 to produce a cardboard package absolutely infuriated the record executives.
I mean, they were using massive corporate budgets to sell communal simplicity back to the youth, the same youth who were actively trying to escape the corporate machine.
It perfectly highlights the central tension of 1970. The counterculture hadn't just survived. It had become the highly lucrative establishment of the music business.
Which leaves you, the listener, with a profound realization to mull over. Déjà Vu is a beautifully harmonized fracture. It represents an America that was realizing the revolution wasn't actually going to happen.
Yeah, it really is the sound of a generation trying to sing their way out of a dark room. They were capturing a dream on tape, just as they woke up to the grim reality of a new decade. And that harmony you hear, it isn't love, it's just brilliant engineering.
If you liked this episode, please support the show by liking and subscribing.